Well, I guess it's that time of year again, as the last few days of 2024 tick down into the booze-fueled journey into oblivion that is New Year's Eve. It feels like the right time to look back on the highs and lows of the year that was. I mean, admittedly, it was mostly lows this year, with an industry still reeling from the effects of last year's strikes and a pretty dismal summer movie season that coined the term flopbuster. But what the hell, I'm going to do my best to sprinkle in a few hints of positivity. With that in mind, let's start with my top 5 personal favorites of 2024. On top of that list has got to be Shogun, a historical drama following the adventures of an English sailor trapped in feudal Japan. It came out so early in the year and eventually got buried under so much other crap that it's easy to forget that it even happened in 2024. But it did happen, and it was a fantastic show that treated the source material with the respect it deserved. Unlike some shows I could name, it showcased superb performances by a talented cast, excellent production values, and generally great writing all around. It's a pleasure to know that thoughtful, mature shows like that are still getting made, that not everything has to revolve around capes, spandex, and over-the-top CGI, and the people are hungry for more of it. Well done, Shogun. Next up is another easy choice for me, The Penguin. I mean, looking back on it now, it was the most unlikely of success stories. A spin-off TV show about a minor character from a not especially popular Batman movie, starring Colin Farrell, buried under layers of prosthetics. It seemed like just another obscure superhero show destined to be forgotten. Instead, it turned out to be a remarkably solid, violent, and mature crime drama with compelling, complex characters, excellent acting all around, and almost no connection to the superhero genre at all, with a script that gently encourages you to empathize with the Penguin before pulling the rug out from under you with a gut-punch ending that'll stay with you long after the credits roll. In third place is a movie that most of you have probably never heard of, but you definitely should watch. One Life, a quiet, unpretentious little British film that came out at the start of the year, starring Anthony Hopkins as an old man who once helped Jewish children escape the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, but only received recognition for his work much later in life. It's not often that a film can bring a tear to the eye of a cynical asshole like me, but One Life did it with ease. It's an important reminder that there are still good people in the world, and even when humanity is at its worst, it's a chance for men to be at their best. Fourth place goes to Dune Part 2, a sci-fi epic by Denis Villeneuve that finally proved it is possible to make a big screen adaptation of Frank Herbert's classic novel. Visually spectacular but emotionally distant, and boasting the kind of cast that's rarely assembled these days, it was a landmark achievement for science fiction movies, proving that more intelligent and mature titles can still be viable mainstream prospects. And this last one isn't really a movie or a TV show, but a short film called Rogue Elements. I'm just with you. It's actually Star Trek Unification, a 7-minute short with absolutely no dialogue that uses a combination of live action and digital face masks to recreate Kirk and Spock as they looked 30 years ago. Poignant, moving, and beautifully shot, it gives Star Trek fans the last goodbye for their two favorite characters that they never got. It shows just how much can be conveyed by a single look and proves the boundless potential for this kind of technology as long as it's used correctly. In a time when the very essence of Star Trek has been strip-mined and buried under tedious, low-effort garbage, the message was nice to be reminded of what once made it so special, and I'm not too proud to admit that I may have shed a tear or two while watching it. For me, that's probably the best this year had to offer. So now, let's take a look at the worst. Wow, narrowing this one down to just 5 choices was a challenge by itself, but there were a couple that I think we can all agree deserve to be there. First up has got to be Madam Web, a one-ape superhero movie in Sony's aborted Spider-Verse that was so hilariously terrible. Even the actors ended up taking the piss out of it, a decision that was almost certainly the best thing they could have possibly done for their careers, featuring some of the worst dialogue, worst acting, worst directing, and worst writing of any superhero movie ever. It was so bad that even the shill media couldn't possibly defend it. Ironically, the movie's spectacular failure and her ability to laugh at it somehow launched Sydney Sweeney into overnight mainstream success. I mean, I can think of a couple of other reasons too, but still, the film was so roundly mocked by everyone that it almost became something for us to bond over. You almost couldn't even be angry at it because it was never going to be anything better. But do you know what we did get angry over? Joker 2, a movie that I could best describe as anti-entertainment, a film made by people who actively hate the original movie and its protagonist, and by extension, anyone who enjoyed either of those things. A tedious and plodding deconstruction of the first Joker, unbearably pretentious and weighed down by cringy and unnecessary musical sequences. It was a film that seemed to have been conceived and executed out of pure spite. Oh, so you thought Arthur Fleck might have been a slightly sympathetic anti-hero who had a reason for doing the things he did? Well, you clearly didn't enjoy the film the way we deem acceptable, and you didn't take the correct messaging from it, so we're going to punish you. Well, in the end, it turned out it was the studio who got punished, and Joker 2 ended up being one of the biggest critical and commercial disasters of the year. So you know what? You, Warner Brothers. Number 3, Borderlands. Let me pose you a question. Dear viewer, do you want to see a cartoonish, hyper-surreal first-person shooter turned into a confused mess of a movie with lame action sequences and a nonsensical story starring a geriatric cast and a lead actress who's a quarter of a century too old for the character she's playing? Nah, me neither. Which probably explains why Borderlands made just $33 million against a $120 million budget, losing the studio tens of millions of dollars and killing any prospect of future movies. Even though it was barely 100 minutes long, it was an absolute slog to get through, and I spent every single minute of it asking myself, why does this movie even exist? To be honest, I still don't have an answer for you. Number 4, The Crow. Possibly the most unanticipated and unwanted movie of the year, a joyless reboot of the Crow franchise that pretty much nailed it with the Brandon Lee movie back in the mid-90s and has been going downhill ever since. It was a film so grimly, tediously, unrelentingly that I felt like I lost all concept of time and space while I was watching it. When it was finally over and I emerged from the movie theater into the sunlight, blinking and confused like a prisoner released from a 2-year stretch in solitary, I had to keep reminding myself that it was actually a real movie and not some weird fever dream. It was slow, bleak, depressing, boring, and generally awful from start to finish, and a top contender for one of my least enjoyable movie experiences ever. But of course, no trip to the 2024 Mount Everest of would be complete unless we reach the peak, the pinnacle of crap, the ultimate in terrible entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you The Acolyte. The power of one, the power of two, the power of, what can I really say about this show that hasn't already been said by pretty much all of YouTube? It was a project conceived by people with no interest or understanding of Star Wars, no talent for writing or filmmaking, and whose only priorities could neatly be summed up in 3 small words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was a $250 million vanity project made by a woman who views entertainment as her own personal therapy session, and greenlit by a studio utterly determined to bulldoze its own franchises into the ground. The backlash against it was so thermonuclear that Disney actually had to promise never to make anything more of it. Really, the only good thing I can say about The Acolyte is that it probably launched the careers of more online movie critics than The Last Jedi, and that in itself is a pretty impressive accomplishment. Now, that's the worst of the year, but there's one more category I want to look at here, and that's my biggest disappointments of 2024. Not necessarily the worst films or TV shows ever made, but things that I had high hopes for that never quite lived up to expectations. On top of the list for me has got to be Gladiator 2. Damn, man, talk about a pointless sequel. It's a movie so preoccupied with venerating the original that it ends up just retelling the same story again, only worse. The acting, the characters, the writing, and the cinematography are all a massive downgrade from the original. It's bloated and self-important. The finale makes no sense, and if nothing else, it's proof that Ridley Scott's best days as a director are well behind him. It's a film that never should have been made by a director who shouldn't be making films, and it's one that I think everyone involved is going to end up regretting. Now, House of the Dragon was one of the standout shows of 2022 for me, with an absolutely stellar cast and the kind of patient, smart, intricate plot that Game of Thrones used to be so good at. So I was pretty excited to tune in for Season 2 this year, and unfortunately, the more I saw of it, the less excited I became. Paddy Constantine's King Viserys was the emotional glue that held Season 1 together, and without him, the show feels kind of directionless, just a bunch of morally grey and increasingly unlikable people doing shitty things to each other with no particular reason to root for anyone. Yeah, it's still well made, but the best way I can describe it is like looking at a really impressive but slightly soulless building. You can admire the technical skill that was involved in making it, but it doesn't really make you feel much of anything. By all accounts, the season had a troubled production history that was reflected in the rushed finale, and an ending that just kind of stops on the verge of a major event. I don't know, man. After this, I can't really imagine getting fired up for watching Season 3. Number 3. Alien Romulus. Talk about failing to stick the landing, man. The trailer got us all pumped up for what looked like a return to form for the Alien franchise, and the competent direction, grounded production design, and decent setup laid the foundations for what should have been a solid action horror movie. Instead, it soon devolved into cheap member berries and nostalgia baiting, recycling ideas and dialogue from far better movies, and an ending that completely fell apart. It could and should have been an easy win, but instead, it turned into a cheap and embarrassing failure. Number 4. Argylle. If ever a movie failed to make use of an impressive cast and a fun premise, it was Argylle. The trailers built it up as a reality-bending action comedy, with Henry Cavill playing a suave fictional super spy who might just be more real than he seemed. Instead, it turned out to be a tedious and unfunny slog about a fat middle-aged woman who somehow turns out to be the most deadly secret agent in the world. Bryce Dallas Howard looks awkward and uncomfortable, especially when she has to do anything even resembling action. Henry Cavill's barely even in the movie, and even Sam Rockwell can't rescue what turned out to be a complete dud of a film. Now, this last one's probably going to be controversial, but here goes. Season 2 of Arcane really wasn't very good, and it was a big downgrade from Season 1. Now, before you get your pitchforks out, don't get me wrong. The animation is still absolutely gorgeous. Some of the characters get individually great moments, and the voice acting is still top-notch. But the writing and creative direction are badly lacking compared to the previous season. Characters like Vi, who were central to the narrative in Season 1, are pushed into the background for no good reason. Jinx now acts like a completely different person. The plot tries to introduce so much new technology and world-changing concepts that I ended up feeling completely lost by it. And the big final confrontation is so rushed and poorly executed that I genuinely started to lose track of what everyone was trying to do and why. It feels like they tried to cram 3 seasons worth of character development and plot events into a single season, and the result was a rushed, overstuffed mess that lost so much of what made Season 1 so great. It certainly wasn't the worst thing I've seen this year, but man, considering how much I enjoyed Season 1, it just felt like such a disappointment. And anyway, there you have it, dear viewer, my little attempt to sum up the best and worst of what's been a pretty rough year in entertainment. I don't know what 2025 is going to bring us, but one thing I can promise you is that I'll be there trying to make sense of it. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now